Hello and welcome to this special report from ZenootTV. I'm Nick Peters. The weeks following the end of the Brexit transition period have seen many of the predicted disruptions come to fruition. Customs checks, queues at Dover, haulage issues around complex new documentation and so on. It's fair, though, to suppose that businesses will gradually get their heads around it all and adjust to their new future. But some of the issues look much more embedded and problematic, thanks to the UK leaving the single market, where, as you know, a common set of regulations allowed companies to trade freely across what were then all 28 states. Nowhere is this more concerning than in the chemicals industry, which, for obvious reasons, is more tightly regulated than most. I'm joined by Steve Elliott, Chief Executive of the impressively named CIA, the Chemicals Industry Association. Steve, the common set of regulations pertaining to your industry is called REACH by the EU. Now, what's the impact on your members now that we're no longer part of EU REACH?
Well, Nick, there's a double impact, if you like, in terms of implications. And the double impact is a reflection of how significant the European marketplace is to the UK chemicals industry, with 60% of all of our exports heading to the continent and 75% of all chemical imports coming from the 27. But it's also a reflection of the extent to which our fortunes as the UK and the European industry are wrapped up in one another. Our industry's biggest customer is itself. So the first and most immediate impact was a need to meet an end of December deadline. So there was a requirement, if UK companies wanted to continue serving the European marketplace beyond the year end, they had to transfer their existing registrations under the EU REACH regime, which they've sat there in some cases for a decade or more. They had to transfer those registrations to a legal entity in the EU and register them accordingly with what's called the Central Agency ECHA in Helsinki. And as far as we know, the vast majority of those have been done, Nick, and actually that's quite a task, because the UK and the UK industry was the second largest registrant under EU REACH after the German industry. So that was the first sort of impact, Nick, and that will still rumble through, and we'll understand a bit better as the weeks go by to see actually whether any businesses decided actually it's just not worth my while doing that, and whether any of those actions result in supply chain disruption, particularly on the continent. But so far, so good, I think, on that, Nick.
Does this mean, though, that if we're outside REACH, that we're going to have to start creating our own set of regulations? What's the impact of that?
Yeah, and that's the second aspect, Nick. So there's the immediate compliance requirement to ensure we can continue accessing the European marketplace. And you're right, because we are now going it alone, the requirement is to establish and build a UK REACH regime that satisfies safety, health, and environmental and supposedly competitiveness concerns for the UK government, wider society, and industry. And under UK REACH, as it currently stands, as a consequence of the free trade agreement, one element that was not secured was, to be fair to the UK government, an attempt to access all of the data we had generated over the past decade for the EU regime, and to try and transfer that across to satisfy a UK equivalent regime. Because that was not granted, and the reason it was not granted, I understand, is that the Commission, said that would be a gift of single market membership. But because we do not have that, and because the UK's own red line was around sovereignty, we now have to, as it stands, as a first step to informing our future regulatory regime for chemicals, essentially replicate everything we have done over the past decade for the UK authorities.
I've heard figures of £1 billion, and it's going to take us 6 years to do it. That seems an awful burden on the industry.
It is a burden, Nick. Nobody is suggesting that we want a light touch or we want an easy ride with regard to safety, health, and environmental concerns. And you're right. The original investment over the past decade for the European regime has been about 500 million from the UK industry. And perversely, to inform the UK regime, actually an estimate is it's going to be double that. And the reason for that is not only do you have the 500 million that the manufacturing industry has to duplicate, but under the UK regime, our customers, who were classed as what was called downstream users under the European regime, all our customers now in the UK are now classed as importers. And they now have their own registration and compliance responsibilities. So there is a cost on manufacturers, and there is a cost on importers bringing in materials from Europe as well. So it is, our last estimate was about £1 billion sterling cost. And whilst the overall agreement, Nick, has been one of relief because we've avoided tariffs and quotas, and that in itself would have been probably about an annual 1 billion. Good that we haven't got that. This REACH compliance requirement is probably the single most significant cost right across a very, very broad chemical industry, from petrochemicals through to what we call specialities and fine chemicals, but then also in turn our customer industries like the automotive industry and the aviation industry.
Isn't there a very significant paradox here that, as you mentioned earlier, the reason for not acceding to or sticking with EU REACH was because of the sovereignty issue, because we want to go our own way on regulations. But the very fact is that particularly with a sensitive commodity as your industry produces, we're going to have to track EU regulations all the way anyway if we want to carry on doing business with them.
Yeah, our view is that this is commercially illogical. It's also in that time frame where we initially have to replicate everything. There's no logic environmentally or from a health perspective either, because we're not doing anything more than duplicating what we've already done. So you're right, Nick. This is perverse, because the European marketplace is by a long way collectively our biggest marketplace. And yes, the rest of the world opportunity is growing, but not at the speed that might compensate for this. So if we want to continue to win business in Europe and service our marketplace, we need to comply with EU REACH and at the same time build and inform a UK mechanism.
You must have made representations about this to the government during the negotiations and before, in fact, probably since the Brexit vote itself. Did they just ignore you? Did they give an impression that they understood what you were getting at?
I think they've understood. I think all along as I said, the commercial illogicality of this, and maybe we have been at the mercy of politics. To be fair, I would say two things. One, in terms of the implications for UK industry, it is true that our Environment Ministry has pushed out what were called the registration requirements under UK REACH to 2, 4, and 6 years, Nick. Now, that time frame was much shorter than that originally, but during 2020, they acknowledged that breathing space was required. So that's helped a little bit, but it doesn't change the cost. It just changes the phasing of the cost. The second thing I would say, again, to be fair to the government, is David Frost and the team, and behind them all of the officials, pushed very hard for the access to data as part of a proposed chemicals annex. And the chemicals annex was agreed with the European Union, but this key element was not, for the reasons I mentioned earlier. So they have listened to an extent, and we're not giving up now, because to move from what until Christmas Eve was potentially still on the table in terms of access to that data we'd already invested in, to then jump from that to this duplication of everything we've done without some potential pragmatic middle ground is something that we think is just not right. So we're going to continue to work with the government, particularly with the Business Department, the Environment Ministry, and the Department for Work and Pensions, Nick, who have the responsibility for the Health and Safety Executive, who are going to be the body to implement and regulate UK REACH.
Okay, well, Steve Elliott, thank you very much indeed for being with us. I wish you and your team all the very best of luck, as I'm sure all your members do as well. This has been a special report from ZenootTV. I'm Nick Peters. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. We'll see you again soon.